What if one man's dream could unite the known world, and his empire's roads could still be traced thousands of years later? And what if that same dream, born in golden palaces of Persepolis, would one day collapse under the weight of its own ambition? This is the story of the Achaemenid Empire, the first true superpower of history. A world where kings called themselves King of Kings, where marble cities rose from desert dust, and where messengers could race across continents faster than any before them. From the vision of Cyrus the Great, who turned scattered tribes into a nation of nations, to Darius the Builder, who carved highways through mountains and deserts, to Xerxes, whose arrogance would ignite the fires of downfall against Greece. But behind every crown gleamed secret betrayals in the royal court, rebellions buried beneath the sand, and whispers that even the gods themselves had turned their gaze away. This is not just history, it's the rise and fall of a civilization that defined the meaning of empire itself. Stay till the end, because what began as Cyrus's dream may still shape the way we rule, build, and fall today. The dream of Cyrus the Great. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to rise from obscurity to command the largest empire the world had ever seen? Or how one man's vision could outlast the sands of Persia, echoing through centuries of empires yet unborn? Long before marble palaces gleamed under the sun of Persepolis, before Darius's highways stretched across deserts, there was a prince, a boy from the rugged lands of Anshan, whose name would one day strike awe and fear into kings. His name was Cyrus, son of Cambyses, heir to a world that did not yet know what it meant to be united. In the 6th century BCE, the Iranian plateau was a land divided, tribes warring, kingdoms fractured, loyalties thin as desert wind. To the west lay the mighty Medes, and beyond them, the wealthy Lydians and the mysterious Babylonians. Persia was a whisper among giants. But Cyrus saw what others did not. He saw not chaos, but potential, 1,000 pieces, waiting for a single hand to forge them into something eternal. It is said that Cyrus's birth itself was wrapped in prophecy. The Median king, Astyages, dreamed that his daughter's son would one day overthrow him. In fear, he ordered the newborn's death, but fate had other plans. The infant was spared by a shepherd, raised among the hills, unaware that the blood of kings pulsed through his veins. Years later, destiny revealed itself when Cyrus, now a young warrior, gathered men under his banner, farmers, nomads, exiles, all burning with one shared hunger: freedom. The rebellion against Astyages was not merely a battle for a throne. It was a revolution of identity. When the Persians rose, they rose as a people, tired of being vassals, eager to claim their place among the powerful. The Medes fell, and from their ashes rose a new force, the Achaemenid Empire. Born under the lion banner of Persia, Cyrus did not rule with the iron cruelty common to conquerors. He ruled with vision and cunning. When he marched west to face Croesus, the fabulously rich king of Lydia, the world watched in disbelief. The Lydians were armed with gold, cavalry, and confidence, yet Cyrus outmaneuvered them, feigning retreat, drawing their forces into traps, and capturing Sardis, the richest city in Asia Minor. Croesus, once the envy of kings, now stood a prisoner before the man he had underestimated. But what happened next shocked the world. Cyrus did not kill Croesus. He spared him, took his counsel, and treated him as a friend. It was mercy in a time when mercy was weakness, and it became Cyrus's secret weapon. Conquered peoples found not enslavement, but respect. Their gods were honored, their traditions preserved. The empire grew not through terror, but through trust. Yet even empires built on wisdom must test the edge of ambition. Cyrus turned his eyes east, toward Babylon, the jewel of Mesopotamia. Its walls said to be so wide that chariots could race upon them. Inside sat Nabonidus, a king more interested in worshipping forgotten gods than ruling his people. Babylon was crumbling from within. and Cyrus saw the cracks dot as his armies approached in 539 BCE. The Babylonians believed their city impregnable, but under moonlight, Cyrus's engineers diverted the Euphrates River, lowering its waters enough for his soldiers to slip beneath the gates. By dawn, the empire that had once built the Hanging Gardens belonged to Persia. The people of Babylon awoke not to flames, but to proclamation. Cyrus, in his famous cylinder, declared freedom for all nations and respect for all faiths. "I am Cyrus," it reads, "King of the world." It was not arrogance, it was destiny fulfilled. For the first time in human history, an empire stretched from the Aegean to the Indus, ruled not by fear, but by law and tolerance. The dream of unity had taken form, but dreams, even divine ones, have shadows. In his later years, Cyrus rode east against the nomadic tribes of Central Asia, the Masragite, fierce horsemen led by the warrior queen Tamiris. The desert swallowed armies, and pride clouded judgment. Cyrus pressed too far, too fast. The Masragite fought with the fury of those defending their freedom. Legends say that Cyrus was captured and slain, his head placed in a skin of blood, as Tamiris cried, "Drink your fill, for you thirsted for blood." Whether truth or myth, his death was an end worthy of an epic. But what mattered most was not how Cyrus died, it was what he left behind. He had built an empire unlike any before it, a living map of humanity's potential. His subjects from Greeks to Egyptians, from Jews to Bactrians lived under one law, traveled one road, and recognized one authority. He had proved that empires could be built not only with swords, but with principles. As his body was carried to Persia, where his tomb still stands silent beneath Persian skies, a new question arose among his people. Could anyone carry the dream forward? Could anyone rule as justly, as wisely, as Cyrus the Great? For soon, his son Cambyses would take the throne, and with him would come storms of madness and conquest. The empire that Cyrus forged in unity would tremble on the edge of chaos, and as dawn rose over the Persian plateau, the question whispered through the palaces of Persepolis: was Cyrus's dream too great for mortal hands to hold? Darius and the roads of empire. What happens when a dream outlives its dreamer? When the man who once united nations is gone, who dares to hold together the world he left behind? The death of Cyrus sent ripples through the empire, like thunder over a silent plain. His son, Cambyses, inherited not just a throne, but an impossible expectation. Where his father had ruled with vision, Cambyses ruled with obsession. He wanted to prove he was not merely his father's shadow, and so he turned his eyes to Egypt, the one jewel the empire did not yet possess. The conquest of Egypt began with glory. Persian banners fluttered above the Nile, temples fell, and the pharaoh's throne was claimed. Yet beneath the victory lay madness. Legends whispered that Cambyses stabbed the sacred bull of Apis in a fit of rage, mocked Egyptian gods, and began to see treachery in every corner. Whether poisoned by power or haunted by guilt, he became a prisoner of his own paranoia. One by one, his advisors vanished. His brother, Smerdis, was executed, or so he believed. Then came the twist that would shake the empire. Word spread that Smerdis was alive and had seized the throne. But the truth was darker. The man who now wore the crown was not Smerdis at all. It was a magus, a priestly impostor. As Cambyses raced back through the desert to reclaim his empire, his horse stumbled, and his own sword pierced his thigh. Some say it was accident, others say fate. He died whispering that Persia would never hold together again. But fate was not done with Persia. In the chaos that followed, as nobles and soldiers whispered of rebellion, a new figure emerged, man who claimed not just to serve the Achaemenid line, but to restore it. His name was Darius, son of Astaspis, of noble but secondary blood. Darius was not born a king, yet he understood power better than most kings ever would. He gathered 6 loyal nobles and stormed the palace at dawn. The false Smerdis fell beneath their blades, and Darius, standing amid the silence of victory, declared himself king by the grace of Ahura Mazda. But the empire he inherited was no longer united. Revolts erupted like wildfire from Egypt to Babylon, from Media to Elam. Each province rose in defiance, declaring independence under self-proclaimed kings. The dream of Cyrus seemed to shatter into dust. Darius responded not with mercy, but with fire. For nearly 2 years, Persia burned. Battles raged across mountains and deserts. Darius rode at the head of his armies, crushing rebellion after rebellion until no rival crown remained. When the dust settled, he stood atop a mountain of conquest, but even he knew victory by sword alone would not last. That's when he did something no conqueror had ever done. Instead of ruling by fear, Darius ruled by system. He divided the empire into 20 provinces, satrapies, each ruled by a satrap or governor, loyal to him, but watched by spies known only as the king's eyes and ears. It was genius, a web of loyalty and suspicion that kept the empire breathing in order and fear. He minted the first Persian gold coin, the daric, whose gleaming image carried his name from the Aegean to the Indus. He standardized weights and measures, reformed laws, and built the first true highway of history, the Royal Road, stretching nearly 2,700 kilometers from Sardis to Susa. Along its route stood relay stations where fresh horses waited, allowing royal messengers to cross the empire in days rather than months. It was said that neither snow nor rain nor heat nor darkness of night prevents these couriers from completing their appointed course with all speed. Centuries later, that same phrase would inspire the motto of modern postal services. But these roads were more than paths of communication, they were veins of control. Gold, grain, and information pulsed through them, binding together a world of 50 million souls. And yet, for all its structure, the empire's heart beat with something far more fragile. Belief. Darius was not merely a builder, he was a believer. He inscribed his faith upon the cliffs of Behistun, carving a message that still survives today. There, in ancient Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian, he told the world of his right to rule, his battles, his triumphs, and his devotion to Ahura Mazda, the god of light and truth. For Darius, kingship was not conquest. Was divine duty, but divine duty came with divine enemies. Far to the west, the Greek city-states Athens, Sparta, and their allies watched the Persian expansion with fear and arrogance. To them, Persia was a giant built on gold and superstition, a world they neither understood nor respected. Darius saw them as a nuisance at first, a swarm of free cities daring to insult the King of Kings. When Athens supported a rebellion in Ionia, Persia's western subjects rose in revolt, and the flames of defiance spread across the Aegean. Darius vowed vengeance. "Who are these Athenians?" he asked. "May I live long enough to punish them." And every night, at his table, it said he ordered a servant to whisper in his ear, "Master, remember the Athenians." The invasion that followed would shape the destiny of 2 worlds. From the coast of Asia Minor, fleets were assembled, armies raised, and banners unfurled. When Persian ships landed on the plain of Marathon in 490 BCE, it was more than a battle, it was a collision between empires and ideals. The Greeks, outnumbered and unprepared, faced the might of Persia. Yet, when the dust cleared, it was the Persians who fell. The defeat at Marathon was not the end of Darius's empire, but it was the first crack in the illusion of its invincibility. The great king, old and sick, prepared for another invasion, one that would crush Greece once and for all. But before his vengeance could sail, Darius died. The torch would pass to his son Xerxes, a man whose ambition would match his father's empire, but whose pride would ignite its downfall. And as the sun set over Persepolis, the roads that Darius built gleamed like golden veins across the earth, carrying not just messages of power, but whispers of destiny. For the empire that once seemed eternal was now marching toward its greatest trial, an empire at its height, about to face the limits of its own reach. Xerxes and the fire of hubris. Have you ever seen a man inherit a god's throne and believe himself divine enough to wield it? Or watch the moment when greatness turns to arrogance and arrogance to ruin? When Darius the Great died, the empire he left behind stretched farther than any in history. His son, Xerxes, tall, handsome, and untested, ascended the throne amid whispers. Could he fill his father's sandals, or would he drown in their weight? The court at Persepolis glittered with gold and envy, courtiers bowing so low they nearly kissed the floor. Yet, beneath their words of loyalty, ambition stirred like coiled serpents. Xerxes was born into majesty. He had never known the hunger, the battles, the hard-won victories that shaped Cyrus or Darius. His world was marble and silk. When he looked upon the empire, he saw perfection his by inheritance, not by conquest. But perfection, as every king learns too late, is fragile. Early in his reign, Egypt and Babylon rebelled. To Xerxes, this was not politics, it was blasphemy. He crushed both with merciless speed. Babylon, once revered by his grandfather Cyrus, was stripped of its statues, its temples desecrated. The people who had once called Cyrus liberator now whispered curses against his grandson. The seeds of resentment took root, but Xerxes did not notice. His gaze was fixed westward, in the corridors of his palace. Beneath ceilings painted with winged bulls and sun gods, Xerxes paced. The ghost of Marathon haunted him. His father's unfulfilled vow burned in his mind, to avenge Persia's humiliation at Greek hands. Xerxes would not merely punish Greece, would erase it. He would make the Aegean his private lake and the Acropolis his trophy. Preparations began on a scale the world had never seen. Messengers galloped along Darius's royal road, carrying orders for timber, bronze, grain, and men. Across the empire from India to Egypt, from Bactria to Lydia, soldiers marched under the Persian banner. By the time the campaign was ready, it is said the army numbered over 2 million souls. The spectacle was staggering. Along the Hellespont, the narrow straits separating Asia from Europe, Xerxes ordered 2 great bridges built of boats lashed together, so his army could march upon the sea itself. But a storm struck, tearing the bridges apart. In a fury that has echoed through history, Xerxes commanded his men to whip the sea with chains and brand it with hot irons, shouting that the ocean would obey its master. To his followers, it was divine command. To his enemies, madness. To history it was hubris. The Persians rebuilt the bridges, and the army crossed into Europe like a moving city. Behind them came supply trains of camels, elephants, engineers, and slaves. Ahead waited resistance, small, defiant, and impossibly brave. At Thermopylae, a narrow pass between mountains and sea, 7,000 Greeks awaited the tide. Among them stood 300 Spartans, under King Leonidas, men who knew they would die. For 3 days, they held back the endless waves of Persian soldiers. Xerxes watched, astonished, as the mountain pass became a furnace of blood and courage. When the Greeks were finally betrayed and surrounded, Leonidas fought until his body was pierced by spears. The pass was taken, but at a cost that haunted Xerxes. He had won the battle, yet the Greeks had seized the legend. Even in victory, Persia felt the tremor of defiance. Still, the road to Athens lay open. Xerxes marched on, his armies burning villages and temples as they went. When he entered Athens, the city was deserted. Its people had fled to the island of Salamis, their ships forming a desperate fleet across the narrow strait. Xerxes, from his golden throne on the shore, watched as his vast navy advanced. The Greeks were outnumbered, cornered, and terrified. But the sea that Xerxes had once whipped turned against him. The narrow waters trapped his mighty fleet, its sheer size working against it. The Greek triremes darted through like wolves among cattle, ramming, burning, sinking. Xerxes could only watch as his empire's pride shattered before his eyes. When the smoke cleared, the Aegean belonged to Greece once more. Xerxes, fearing rebellion at home, retreated to Persia, leaving his general Mardonius to continue the fight. At Plataea the next year, the Persian army fell again, broken by unity among people they had called insignificant. The dream of conquering the West died on those plains. Back in Persia, Xerxes sought solace in grandeur. He turned inward, retreating from war to the pleasures of his court. The construction of Persepolis, begun by his father, became his obsession, a city of unimaginable beauty, carved from stone and light. Massive columns rose like forests of marble, stairways adorned with carvings of nations bearing tribute. In these reliefs, you can still see his world, the Ethiopians, the Medes, the Indians, the Lydians, all carrying gifts to their king. It was a vision of harmony, frozen in stone, but beneath the splendor, cracks widened, the treasury drained, provinces murmured, and in the silence of the palace, conspiracies brewed. Years passed. Xerxes, once the god-king who bridged continents, grew weary and paranoid. He withdrew from his people, trusting only his harem and his inner circle. Then, one night, betrayal crept into his chamber. A trusted court official, Artabanus, entered quietly and struck. The king of kings, who had once whipped the sea, fell to the blade of a servant. His death sent the empire spiraling into uncertainty. Behind the curtains of gold, whispers began again. Had the gods finally abandoned Persia? The roads of Darius still stretched across the empire, but the message they now carried was one of decay. Yet history, like the desert wind, never blows in one direction. From the ashes of Xerxes' pride, something else began to stir, an idea of endurance, of resilience, that would outlast even the fall of kings. But as the empire limped toward its twilight, far to the west, a new power was awakening. A young kingdom in the mountains of Macedonia, a prince with a fire in his eyes. His name was Alexander, and he would one day come not to pay tribute, but to conquer. The story of Persia was far from over. In fact, its most dramatic chapter was yet to come. The fall of empire, Alexander's shadow. Have you ever watched an empire crumble, not from the outside, but from within? When power becomes tradition, and tradition becomes blindness, even the greatest empires begin to rot silently. By the time Xerxes' son, Artaxerxes I, took the throne, the golden age of Persia was fading like an evening sun. The palaces still gleamed, the courtiers still bowed, but the pulse of the empire had weakened. Corruption spread through satrapies, governors grew bold and greedy, and once loyal armies began to sell their allegiance for silver. The grandeur remained, but the soul was weary. For decades, Persia drifted between glory and decay. There were kings who ruled with grace, and others who murdered brothers, mothers, and sons to seize the crown. The empire survived each wound, but each scar cut deeper. The roads Darius built now carried whispers of rebellion, not unity. The gold that once filled the treasuries of Persepolis was spent on internal wars, and in the west, across the sea that Xerxes had once dared to tame, a new kind of fire was rising. In the small northern kingdom of Macedonia, a boy was growing into legend. Tutored by Aristotle, inspired by the hero Achilles, and hardened by his father Philip's wars, Alexander dreamed not merely of conquest but of destiny. To the Greeks, Persia was still the giant that had once burned their cities. To Alexander, it was the final proving ground, the monster he must slay to become immortal. When Darius III rose to the Persian throne, the empire still stretched from the Aegean to the Indus, but it was a lion grown old. His generals were loyal, but divided. His satraps powerful, but selfish. Darius himself was brave, yet haunted by the legacy of those before him. He ruled from Babylon and Susa, issuing orders that few obeyed and trusting men whose loyalty had long since faded. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont, the same strait Xerxes had once bridged with chains. But where Xerxes brought an army of millions, Alexander brought only 40,000 men. What he lacked in size, he made up for in speed, strategy, and audacity. His first victory at Granicus was swift and shocking. Persian satraps fell in battle, and Asia Minor began to crumble under his advance. Darius III gathered the might of Persia, an army said to number 200,000, and met Alexander at Issus. The plain was narrow, favoring the smaller, disciplined Greek forces. When the clash began, the air filled with dust, bronze, and screams. Alexander, shining beneath his lion-crested helmet, drove his cavalry straight toward Darius himself. In that instant, the King of Kings turned and fled. His army, seeing their master retreat, broke in chaos. Darius's family was captured, his mother, wife, and daughters all treated by Alexander with a respect that humiliated Persia even more deeply. Darius's heart broke, not from wounds, but from shame. The old empire was unraveling. City by city, province by province, Alexander's legend consumed it. In 331 BCE, they met again, this time on the plain of Gaugamela, battle that would decide the fate of the world. Darius had prepared this time. He had chosen open ground, deployed scythed chariots, and assembled war elephants from India. The Persians waited in their thousands, the Macedonians in their disciplined ranks. When dawn rose, the desert shimmered with heat and dread. Alexander prayed to Zeus, then raised his hand, a signal that would end an empire. His cavalry swept in a curve, baiting the Persian left flank to stretch thin. Then, in a move so bold it's still studied today, he plunged through the gap straight toward Darius once again. Panic rippled through the Persian line. Darius turned his chariot, perhaps to regroup, but his army saw only retreat. Once more, the King of Kings fled. Once more, his empire fell with him. Babylon opened its gates to Alexander without resistance. Susa surrendered its treasures, hundreds of tons of gold and silver, tribute from centuries of rule. And then came Persepolis, the heart of Persia, the city of kings. Alexander entered it as a conqueror, but lingered as if in awe. The great halls, the carved reliefs, the stairways of tribute, they were not the works of barbarians, as Greeks had claimed, but of dreamers and builders. He saw, in Persia, not an enemy, but a mirror of what he himself might become. But history has its own appetite for irony. At a drunken feast, perhaps to avenge Greece, perhaps in madness, Alexander ordered Persepolis burned. Flames devoured columns that had stood for generations. Gold melted into rivers of fire. Statues of kings cracked and fell as the night sky filled with embers. The city that had once defined civilization vanished in a single night of pride. The story goes that as the flames rose higher, Alexander wept, whether from guilt or revelation, none can say. He had avenged Greece, yes, but, in destroying Persepolis, he had destroyed something greater, the living soul of empire. Darius fled eastward, pursued by his conqueror, until betrayal found him. His own satrap, Bessus, turned against him, stabbing him and leaving him bleeding in the dust. When Alexander arrived, Darius still breathed. The conqueror knelt beside the dying king. In that quiet desert moment, the age of Persia ended. Alexander covered Darius's body with his cloak and declared himself his successor, not a destroyer, but an heir. He ordered royal burial rites in full Persian fashion. The empire of Cyrus, of Darius, of Xerxes, now lived under a Macedonian crown. But Persia, though conquered, was not broken. Its spirit endured in the hearts of its people, in the roads that still crossed continents, in the tolerance and governance that Alexander himself adopted. The empire fell, yes, but its ideas survived. reshaped into the world that would follow. And as Alexander rode east toward India, toward his own death and legend, the shadow of Persia followed him, still whispering through the ruins, through the smoke of Persepolis, that empires rise, not on conquest, but on the dreams of those who believe they can outlast time itself. Echoes of empire, the legacy of Persia. Have you ever wondered why, even centuries after their fall, some empires never truly die? Why their spirit lingers in our roads, our laws, our languages, as if their heartbeat still echoes beneath the skin of civilization. When Alexander claimed Persia, he believed he had conquered the world. But what he did not know was that Persia had already conquered time. The Achaemenid Empire may have been buried under Macedonian banners, but its ideas, its systems, its tolerance, its vision became the bones of the world that followed after Alexander's death in Babylon. His generals carved up the empire like scavengers dividing the body of a god. Yet the Persian lands refused to fade. The satrapal system, created by Darius, became the model for provincial governance under the Seleucids and later the Parthians. The royal road still carried merchants and soldiers, its ancient stones guiding the Silk Road that would soon connect China to the Mediterranean. The languages once used to issue royal decrees evolved, merging into new tongues that would dominate trade and scripture alike. But perhaps the most enduring gift of the Achaemenids was not in politics or warfare, it was in their vision of order through diversity. While other empires demanded obedience through destruction, Persia had ruled through understanding. Under Cyrus, conquered peoples worshipped their own gods, spoke their own languages, and lived under laws that recognized their customs. That spirit of tolerance, radical in its age, would survive long after the empire itself had crumbled. Even Alexander, who came as a conqueror, could not resist the allure of Persian grandeur. He married Roxana, a Bactrian princess, and adopted Persian dress and ceremony, blending East and West in a gesture that shocked his Greek companions, but revealed something deeper. Persia had become not just a place, but an idea of fusion of worlds. Centuries later, the Parthians and then the Sassanids rose upon Persian soil, each claiming descent from Cyrus, each attempting to revive the flame that once lit the halls of Persepolis. They fought Rome, and Byzantium ruled over poets and philosophers, and carried forth the memory of the first empire that had dared to call itself universal. Even as religions changed and languages shifted, the Persian concept of the King of Kings, the divine protector of justice and order, survived, transforming the very definition of rulership across Asia and Europe. But Persia's legacy was not only royal, it was human. When modern archaeologists uncovered the Cyrus cylinder, they found inscribed upon its clay words of freedom, promises to return displaced peoples to their homelands, to honor their temples, to end slavery. Many have called it the world's first charter of human rights, thousands of years before philosophers debated liberty. Cyrus had written it into stone, and yet, for all its enlightenment, the Persian story remains bittersweet. The empire that began with mercy ended in betrayal. The roads that once united nations eventually carried invaders. The palaces that shone like suns now lie silent under layers of dust. But if you stand among the ruins of Persepolis today beneath the carved faces of envoys from every nation, you can still feel it. The hum of an idea too vast to die. The lesson of Persia is one humanity keeps forgetting. That power built on fear burns fast, but power built on vision endures. That unity is not sameness, but harmony. That empires fall, but ideas, if just and wise, outlive their makers. The Persians believed that every choice, every act, tilted the balance between light and darkness. Perhaps that is why their story still speaks to us. Because in every age, we build new roads, new empires, new dreams, and in each, we face the same question Cyrus once did. Can we rule not just with might, but with wisdom? as the wind sweeps across the silent stones of Persepolis. The echoes whisper their answer not in words, but in the endurance of their creation. Roads still run where Darius once rode. Justice still bears the name of Cyrus, and somewhere, in the endless struggle between order and chaos, the light of Persia still flickers. It is not the story of a fallen empire. It is the story of humanity's oldest dream, to build something that time itself cannot destroy. And perhaps, if you listen closely enough, you'll hear it too. The heartbeat of the first empire that taught the world how to be one. The end.